market. This is our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time at 12 p.m. BST. Every day of the week, we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and the Japanese carry trade market. We're going to get into everything that's happened in the past 24 hours and more. But just a reminder, friends, before we get into it, none of what we say is financial advice. This market is incredibly risky and we don't know anything for sure. In fact, sometimes we're just learning about things just a few hours before we start, and we're learning about it live as we do some live research too. So please do bear that in mind, do your own research and be responsible. I'm your host, B-Check. I'm joined by my legendary co-hosts, Sammy and Bread. Today, we are going to be discussing a few very important things. Number one, we'll be talking about Jump trading, just completely selling all of their ETH. And we're going to have a little bit of a conversation on ETH versus Sol, ETH versus Bitcoin, and the ETH ETF, which we haven't really checked in on in a while. We'll talk about memes and their very, very impressive bounce back as the market has kind of bounced back too. We'll talk about BlackRock and their listing or their proposal for a rule change to list and trade options for the spot ETF fund. And we're going to get into this Japanese carry trade, which has caused quite a bit of turmoil in the markets. And we're going to consider to what extent that is resolved, or if that's something we expect to unwind a little bit more. So a lot of important things to discuss as always. Before we get to all of it, Sammy, it is Wednesday. It is the 7th of August. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
You caught me with a mouthful of coffee then. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's beautiful here today in London, so got that smile on my face. It's good. Ready to talk about all this news.
I mean, relatively beautiful, but I think that there are a bunch of
Are you going to
protests.
talk about? Yeah.
It's
Pretty
like,
savage.
well, the weather's kind of nice, but there are going to be a bunch of riots later on. So
Well, I
let's
think
see.
they've been happening all over the country. I think my girlfriend was supposed to be meeting with her aunts and stuff this afternoon in Richmond, but decided
Cancelled
to
it.
cancel it. Yeah, and it's the same with mates in Bristol.
Are the riots
So yeah.
literally scheduled? Like, oh, I don't want to go there, but there's a riot scheduled for 3 o'clock on Ogbury, so I can't be going there.
It's kind of rallied on social media around specific meet points and stuff like that. So you just want to avoid them, to be honest. It's kind of like an extreme minority that have just got extreme views. It's just, yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, I think what's happened, rather than there being like a conference schedule, Brad, it's not it's not like a bunch of side events. Well, actually, maybe it is like a bunch of side events. They've got a bunch of side events scheduled in different locations, but yeah, there's no specific time that you're going to be there. But I think people have figured out, okay, in this area, people are going to be there today. So it is kind of seeped down into London, I think, today, after it being something which has predominantly been in other, predominantly more northern cities or just other cities around the UK. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully all okay for those who are here. Brad, how are you doing? Wednesday, 7th of August. Yeah, how's things your side?
I'm doing lovely directly into my mic at a above average tone for myself. Hopefully that sounds good. Good. You mentioned the Arthur K stuff. I'm actually getting ready to do a post because I cannot stop thinking about that stupid Airheads collection that he did. So it's hard for me to marry a subject that macro, right? I'm not very specialized in it, but obviously he's a very respected guy because everyone quotes him. He brings up some relevant points, all this stuff. It's hard for me to marry I should trust this man from that with how ridiculous the Airheads collection looks. Like that's a very good sign of bad judgment, I think. So it's I'm balancing that in my head. I think I'm gonna get some feedback from the Peanut Gallery, see if my head's right on that, whatever. But yeah, good, up, eating, trying to sell some stuff. Might actually be able to do that. And real life stuff, physical stuff, not crypto assets. I wouldn't do that. That's silly.
Not taking advantage of the crypto bounce then. Just trying to
I've seen some
sell some
pushback on that.
into the
Do you
illiquid
think that's
IRL
real?
market.
Do you think this is the head fake bounce? Do you think this is real? Like that's the back and forth I saw yesterday. Everyone's just going, oh, I don't believe this one, and then those are the people that'll be inevitably sidelined if it keeps going, or they're the ones that write and they'll look back and say, duh, you idiots, you should have sold, or whatever.
I mean, it's a good question. It's something we're going to speak a little bit more about later. I know you were listening to the show. I think you were listening to the show yesterday, but when we had Rahim on, who's
Of
been like
course.
just trading these memes over and over again, just like
Catching
buying
those
them
30
low, and then
percenters.
as
Yeah.
soon as they rip, just sell them high. So I took a bit of advice from that because I think I'd bought PopCat yesterday, and I think maybe about 40 cents, and today was at 16. It's just like, okay, I'll take that. What's on the table? Not in huge size, 'cause I'm just playing around with that stuff, but we'll talk about more of the strategies and how we are thinking about participating with those in just a little bit when we get to that headline, because frankly, all the memes across the board had just completely ripped in the last 24 hours. So we'll get there in just a minute, but let's hit the headlines from the snapshot, which is pinned up top. Thanks for that, Sammy. Let's get into it, starting with some price action, actually. All the coins are looking well. Bitcoin is up almost 4% to above 57K. ETH is up 1% to, well, almost 2.5K, underperforming the rest of the majors as usual. Solana is up 9%, back over $150. Getting into the headlines, number one, Jump Trading cashed out another 116 million worth of ETH yesterday. Total selling reportedly amounting to approximately $600 million at this point. And I believe I saw another tweet where they're still not finished. So, could this be the reason that ETH is being suppressed versus the other coins? We'll consider that in just a little bit. Number two, Ginan, the cat meme, runs 144% in the last 24 hours. But frankly, all the other memes were pretty up in a big way too. Cat meme, Maneki and PopCat, two other cats, were both up more than 20%. Just taking a look down some of the other meme coins here. I will share some of them with you. We had Nero and ETH is up another 30%. Mumu the Bull is up 35%. As I said, Maneki up 25%. PopCat was
That
up
thing is
another.
always going to stare me in the freaking head. I got airdropped that because I'm a big Tyrannosaurus holder, and it was the one thing that I sold forever ago that I was like, I'm actually going to get profit on one of these airdrops that run to zero. Finally, I did it. And then every couple of weeks, it just rears its little head, and it's the second coming of XYZ, and I don't want to do the math. Same thing with Bonk. I sold Bonk at the time, got like 10K, awesome, crushed it, top ticked it, forgot about it, and now that's probably worth like, I don't know, 40, 50 grand, 50 grand, something like that.
Absolutely love it. It's so hard to know how to play those, especially on Solana, because you just get so many coins, right? There's so many in the wallet that just appear over time. Michi as well is up 23%. WIF is up 25% to $1.72. So really across the board, a lot of action here. Muse up 15% as well. So yeah, as I said, memes up in a very, very big way. And then finally, on the kind of more news side of things, BlackRock, an exchange operator, NASDAQ, proposed rule change to list and trade options for the spot ETH fund. Reuters reported this. They said options give holders the right to buy or sell an asset, such as a stock or exchange traded product, at a predetermined price by a set date. The exchange believes that offering options on the trust will benefit investors by providing them with an additional, relatively lower cost investing tool to gain exposure to spot ether, the filing said. Again, probably just another step in a maturing asset class. Those are the headlines. A couple of notable sales. CryptoPunk sales, we've been speaking about the last couple of days, dipping beneath 20 ETH again, and a few other ones between 20 and 21 ETH. Xcopy best case scenario, this is the one I'm showing on screen, 12.69 ETH. The Xcopy market still staying very, very strong. Those are the headlines. That's the price action. Before we get into the bigger discussions today, Sammy, I wonder if we can head over to the Mintify NFT marketplace, our NFT marketplace partner, and just to get your perspective on anything that is catching your attention.
Well, I think just a general theme, like it's been a bit of a bounce. There's a lot of green across the board. The Opepen stuff that I think you commented on yesterday about redeeming it for you give up your votes, but you kind of effectively take like an edition from a new art collection, which is a pretty cool feature. And I think Jack Butcher's always been very thoughtful and creative about how he goes about his Opepen experience. And I think if you think about this collection and how far it's come, it's pretty wild. And this to me epitomizes like the non-fungible element of non-fungible tokens. So
yeah, I mean, that's undoubtedly true. I know that when I tweeted the tweet that I did yesterday saying that I converted one of my Opepens to one of these, what was the word that he described it as? Oh no, this new collection basically. So you have this one collection of 16,000 Opepens, but what Jack has done is said for this period of time, there's this a chance for you to opt out. It's called opt out because usually you're opting into the collections that are proposed. Saying you can opt out and get this different one, which is kind of this image of a burning Opepen, and that's going to be issued from a separate contract. So it's just like getting creative with the distribution of these things, which I guess the market is maybe looking for a little bit of innovation. If you look at it purely from a price perspective, it's like very far down based on what it was, right? Opepens obviously went on a crazy one, went I think at one point to above an ETH, and then hovered around 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, and I'm looking at the price now, it's 0.14 floor. So obviously from a price perspective, I guess people's attention has moved to other places, but I don't think anyone can accuse Jack of not trying to do interesting things, experimenting.
I tend to disagree on the reference to the floor in this collection, because I think that it's so different throughout. You have tiers of different artists and things like that.
Sure.
So I think for me, this kind of is considered separate from other NFT collections where the floor is the floor, because there's so many individual pieces of artwork within here, depending on whoever the artist is, that people are willing to pay significantly above floor for specific ones. You look at the Pudgy ones as an example.
Sure.
I don't know what the price is now, but it'd be like 10, 20x what the floor price is.
Sure.
And there's dozens of other types as well. So I think I wouldn't necessarily think that, I think the direction that he's going with this piece is eventually the floor is going to become irrelevant here, because there's going to be, it goes against the whole hockey stick chart of a traditional NFT collection where there's a few high value assets, but then there's majority of floors. Whereas I think this is so staggered that it's just a bit different.
I will say as an outsider, this is a much more, I was just thinking through in my head, like, would I ever want to buy into this? And like, as you're describing, like the different, like I could see there's 1,000 different like styles and shit in here. Is it like, like I said before, I don't really want to deal with this kind of shit, right? Like knowing the intricacies of the values, like the differentiator between Bats Opepen versus a Squiggle Head versus Opepen, like, and it's such a, like all that for 20% difference on a 0.1 ETH position, like the overhead to return, like brain space thing. I know some people enjoy this. It's just so high for someone like me. And I was thinking for you, P-Check, you have one because you opted into it. Would you buy into this if you didn't already have an Opepen that's converted over to like closed edition shit?
I'm like, I mean, at this, there's two things going on. I think at this price, it actually starts to become an attractive thing. So if you were looking at it purely from a trade perspective, I think you're getting to the region where it's like, maybe it might even be worth it. However, I'm a bit of a,
now that you're a meme coin dude now, right? You don't do NFTs. You're officially on the streets. You're in the trenches. Like now that you've captured, you've tasted a 30% overnight from whatever the fuck coin you flipped last night. Does that still, the work that goes into that, does that still entertain you? And this is going on the back of a tweet I had yesterday where I said I don't think anyone wanted NFTs originally. I don't think anyone wants meme coins now. They just can dream a little bit harder with meme coins. Therefore, that's where they play. And
well, so the only counter to that is that a lot of the work on this collection, like I've already done in a sense, because I'm a bit of a Jack Butcher fan. So like I have collected Jack Butcher. I've got 3 Opepens, I think I have. So one of them I burned. I've still got 2 more. I bought them much higher than this, but I kind of don't stress about it. I don't really consider it as an investment in the way that I'm trying to get in and out of PopCap, basically. So
you're
this
not
is
trying
just,
to flip an Opepen.
I mean, maybe I was at one point, but I always kind of wanted to hold one as well. And I wanted to see what he was doing because I thought the consensus mechanism that he has kind of brought to the table with this opting in thing from a governance perspective was really, really interesting. Like people always talk about how governance is a problem across the board in Web3, right? You can't get people to vote. No one cares. But every time Jack was putting this proposal up, like, do you want to vote for this? He had like everyone voting, or loads and loads of NFT holders voting. So I even thought it was interesting from that perspective. So yeah, I think this is one of the things, like, look, if you like the art and you like kind of like the journey and want to support the person, then you could do that. But I take your point. Lots of people here, if they're distracted on other things, or they're just more focused on the investment perspective in a different direction, it might not be the thing that you want to dive into, because it will require work. Flip side of that, final thing on this before we move on. Flip side of that is, because there's like actually layers to it, I suspect that there's some opportunity to like make money in it because of the complexity and because of the layers. So
But that's most collections, right? Like, oh, I know that the Apris pink dinosaur in Claynosaurus is actually a premium dinosaur, and you're an idiot for not selling that at a higher price. I buy it off the floor and flip it to a collector, a couple hours later. Like that's a thing in all collections, right? It's like if you're, but the
yeah,
time
not on this scale though. Not
I
on
think,
this
I think I
scale.
think punks potentially have that. Like, you look at the tiara that sold for
collections,
35, 36 ETH the other day. It was resold for 72. Now there's speculation as to whether it's a wash trade, but I don't know if
Go on.
that's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think that was legit necessarily. I know what you mean. There's always an element of rarity in these things, but I think there's more. To Sam's point, there's like the penguin ones. There's I don't know. You just got to know all of them. There's been a hell of a lot of sets at this point.
exactly. Yeah, you just have to know all of them.
Yeah.
That's why I don't want to play.
Fair enough. Okay, so that's one collection. We would be wrong to move on without picking out one more that I just saw, which is the DeGods collection, which has pumped almost 50% in the last 24 hours. I suspect this has something to do with one of the other pieces of news in the snapshot, which is that DeGods have let me just get the quote right. DeGods announced they're moving their main chat, sorry. They're not moving chains again. It's a Freudian slip. They've moved their main chat to Telegram, creating DeGods HQ. So they are bridging from Discord to Telegram. Maybe this is part of the
Makes
move.
sense for him. He's been on a trench arc, so like I guess that's just like follow me, soldiers through the trenches. Like that's his thing.
Yeah. Sammy, any thoughts on DeGods here as well?
So I was trying to find the unmute button. I think, to be honest, there's a huge Telegram following. People like Mockaverse recently moved to Telegram. I've seen, yeah, they've got a Telegram channel. They did it just before Telegram properly kicked off, and they're one of the biggest TON validators. So there's been like I don't know if it's developing countries, but if you look at the likes of, I don't know, Hamster Combat or Notcoin, or like there seems to be millions of users. I know Telegram has 800 million users, but in terms of the actual active participants on the TON network, it's got to be in the millions. So I think moving there, it could potentially unlock like DeGods to a significant audience, because people seem to use it quite frequently. I'm not like an avid Telegram user, but I do use it for deal flow and other bits and pieces. And I know for shitcoins, it's great. So I don't know. We'll see.
Although now Pump Fun's coming after him. Do you see that?
Yeah. So might as well deal with that while we're talking about it as well. Also, slightly later in the snapshot, is this what you meant, Brad? Pump Fun announced endless chat functionality to build community and live chat during stream. So a couple of big updates from Pump Fun where they said those two things. A bit of commentary from the founder. He said, we went from devs hard rugging liquidity pools, honeypots, and other scams to devs dumping and bundling to community takeovers, and now decentralized coins. You maybe haven't noticed it, but each iteration makes it far more accessible for outsiders to join. So instead of worrying about shit that doesn't matter, they can focus on finding memes that are actually funny and interesting with communities that are real and crazy and fun. Brad, I know you obviously noticed this and you've been thinking about kind of meme coin distribution in different ways. Do you think it's significant that Pump Fun, who are obviously doing crazy amounts of volume when it comes to helping people deploy these meme coins. Do you think it's significant that they're trying to add this social layer to it?
Yes, because they're effectively verticalizing, right? Like they're verticalizing the meme coin stack, just the same way that Apple did with Apple, right? They own the phone, then they own the App Store, then they own the whatever. They're doing the same thing here with Pump, right? You go to meme coin journey. Before the hard, like what they democratized initially was the ability to launch any meme coin without basically putting in much work, right? Like before, you had to have a dev, you had to line up a Telegram, you had to like see liquidity, you had to do all this shit, right? It's like, okay, they democratized the first part of finding the dev, seeding liquidity, cool. Now, if you think about the current arc, at least pre-update for this, it was okay, launch your own coin, cool, it gets out of the bonding curve. Well, what's the next step? Well, we have to find a Telegram to do a community takeover. We have to like designate like whatever, like all this shit, right? They have to transition the community over to a Telegram. Hope that that's in place. Hope that that doesn't just get deleted at a little later point by the dev. But now, verticalized, right? Part of the pump fund journey is to stay a little longer, right? You don't need to do the migration to Telegram, although it's probably better, like objectively, because Telegram is just a better chat app. You've seen it with everything. You just stay right there and pump. You continue to have your conversation. You continue to have a community, all that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of what I've been calling for, like with like all these things that have existed in pump to date die almost immediately after leaving pump, which is once it hits radium, once it transitions to Telegram, like that chasm is pretty fucking big. So they're just removing part of that chasm and owning it. They don't make any money on it, but it does make stickier users, right? You can stay there, you can monetize the eyeballs, all that shit. So yeah, it's a good move.
Love that context. Sammy, anything else there, or should we get on to this Japanese yen situation?
Well, just to add to Brad's point, I think you got to look at it in terms of a value chain, and I think there's what's the biggest headwind for the end user, the consumer. And I think if you look at an example where taxis, right, you stood on one road but you don't know where the taxi rank is. Like Uber came and disrupted that. They kind of made the end user's life easier. And I think that's exactly what Pump Fund's doing. It's like, well, what happens to the attention once the meme coin hits radium? Like it just dissipates. It's trying to keep them together, keep that community together, and like Brett says, it's kind of leaning into that value chain and trying to improve it.
I like it. I'm increasingly thinking, maybe I got this idea from you, Brad, that like this is what SocialFi actually is. Like people thought it's like social media, but Web3, social media, but with crypto somehow integrated, when actually social fi is just crazy on-chain activity whilst speaking to each other at the same time. Is there any like validity
There's
to
probably
that?
some legs there. Yeah, I mean, it's SocialFi is kind of a broad, nebulous term, so like it can be applied to a bunch of shit. We've seen it be applied to Pump Fund, to Friend Tech, to all this shit, right? So like, yes, and that it pulls together a collective to basically purely on social sentiment drive value to something, right? There's nothing, literally nothing underlying this stuff other than sentiment, because it's a meme coin, right? That's kind of what that is. So yeah, I can see, you can squint and see it, but who the fuck knows, right?
Nice. Okay, I think that's an important development. We'll obviously keep tabs on it as we move forward, but let's get into the main talking points and headlines for today. As we mentioned yesterday, this Japanese yen carry trade, we broke down in a bit more detail yesterday. We obviously know it's very important. We're by no means experts in it, but what we've done today is kind of picked out 3 important bits of information and data which we think will be helpful for you to come to your own conclusions on some of this stuff. The first piece of news, I guess, is that according to Reuters, the Bank of Japan deputy governor stated that the central bank would not raise policy rates amidst instability in financial and capital markets. He stated that if the market remains unstable, it will be necessary to continue maintaining monetary easing at the current level for this time being. Obviously, they'd raised rates from 0 to 0.25%, which had caused the significant sell-off at the back end of last week, and it continued into this week. So they have said they cannot do that anymore. So that's like one way that people have perceived that they're kind of folding. What are the bigger consequences of this? That's what people are trying to figure out. Obviously, crypto market has kind of bounced back today as if nothing's happened, or at least it's moving in that direction. But I think there are a few people who are a bit skeptical. there's two other views I want to bring to you. One is from Tushar Jain, who is managing partner at Multicoin Capital. I actually listened to Tushar on a podcast the other day. Thought he was quite impressive. So
Liquid versus that one on Blockworks.
Yeah,
Liquid Capital versus species.
Yeah, I like that one. I thought he was very good on it.
He had two follow up yesterday, by the way. If you want to follow it up, good podcast. That was commentary on it.
Nice. Two key points I'd say. He said, number one, it's unlikely that a carry trade the size of JPY has unwound in just one day. Either we will see the Bank of Japan try to stem the bleeding soon and risk sacrificing the yen to hyperinflation, or we will see trillions of dollars worth of liquidations continue until the Bank of Japan is forced to act. The second point he made just 9 hours ago was the Bank of Japan ended their tightening cycle after 25 BPS. Market is expecting several Fed rate cuts this year and more next year. Global money printers are starting to warm up. Trump announced support for legitimizing BC as a sovereign level reserve asset. Every sovereign in the world is forced to consider the asset seriously. The one piece of news that he thought important, which we touched on and said it was important too, but it was lost in all the bad news the last few days. Major wealth managers like Morgan Stanley are just now able to solicit clients to invest in Bitcoin. Most of their pair firms won't be left behind. And much of the leverage in the crypto market was just wiped out this week. So I think it's a generally bullish post, kind of going over the various reasons why Bitcoin's got some tailwinds at the moment. But also focusing on the Bank of Japan stuff. And then finally, Arthur Hayes has managed to write quite a lengthy article. It is fairly complex. I do not intend to read all of it here, but if you are interested, it is called Spirited Away. He published it yesterday. Maybe some key takeaways from it would be this. In fact, let me stop there and then we'll maybe come to some more takeaways from this, because Sam, I know you've been following this. I know you wrote your newsletter on the Japanese carry trade this week. What do you think is, like, from your reading, from your writing, what do you think the key takeaways are from the current situation as it relates to crypto with this Japanese carry trade?
So I don't think it's I mean, it's not a crypto specific issue, right? It's a macro issue. There's a huge currency risk between the yen and the USD. Now, I don't know to what detail you went into yesterday explaining it, but ultimately the Bank of Japan has had negative interest rates for a period of time, and then it went to zero, and now they've raised it again. So I don't think they've raised it for about 17 years. Now, what that effectively means is investors or traders can borrow from Japan for incredibly low rates and then reinvest that for higher yields overseas in the likes of the US. And that's what's been happening for decades. But increasing that interest rate to 0.25% doesn't seem like much, but that effectively means that debt becomes a lot more expensive. So people then start to unwind their positions. And when you say that effectively means they will sort of sell those US equities or higher interest yielding assets and then repay that Japanese debt. So you're effectively seeing a bit of that unwind now. Now, I think the Bank of Japan alone has like a $20 trillion exposure to that particular trade. So I agree with, was it Tarshad? That's not going to unwind overnight. That's going to be a significant length of time that's going to take to unwind. And I don't think it's going to unwind completely, because ultimately that's still relatively cheap debt compared to other countries. So actually there will be some that have probably a significant leveraging situation where they have to repay that debt because they can't afford the interest. Or there might have been people that have just been netting the spread on that particular borrowing versus sort of reinvesting it in US government bonds or whatever it might be. So I think there's so many nuances and complexities to this, that even though the BOJ has a huge amount of exposure, like, I don't think that's necessarily how that's not going to unwind and hit the market completely. It's going to take a long period of time for that to happen. There's a load of traders and investors that are going to unwind and do that same thing. But referring it back to crypto, it's not a crypto specific thing. Like, if anything, I think that crypto will probably continue outperforming US stocks as that trade unwinds over a period of time, because stock markets have been at an all-time high, and this is a significant amount of capital that would need to unwind to reverse that trade to a level that's kind of reasonable for the market to find that parity. But I think the past couple of days where we saw like significant sell-offs, I think that's just the market reacting to it, right? That's not necessarily people unwinding their trades in a panic moment. There might have been a few that have done it just to get ahead of the curve, but
that's like people trying to front run the people who might need to unwind.
Yeah, it's like you hear about, I don't know, like refer it back to NFTs with Matchy. If you see Matchy has a shitload of NFTs, like you want to sell your NFTs because you think he's going to dump it. So you try and front run it. And I think it's a similar situation here where people are effectively trying to
bad community member, sir?
What, sorry?
Are you calling Machi a bad community member, sir?
No, he's a market maker. He just holds a significant amount of NFTs in stock that he needs to offload from time to time. But yeah, no, I think, it's how you can calculate which way it's going to go from here. I don't know, but I think like if the US doesn't respond and kind of counter that, like ultimately it's not just like Japan makes a decision and then the world suffers. Like you've got all these other countries that effectively, I look at it as scales, right? Like you've got different countries will respond to that with various economic levers to try and balance it out over time. I think we've seen the news is out there. So if you assume that the market prices it in, then we've probably seen the worst immediate amounts of it. But I do think there probably will be some more downside for the stock market whilst that unwinds. But I don't think that in the medium to long term, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, particularly when you've got, like you said, with Morgan Stanley coming in and offering retail investors exposure to ETH. That's pretty bullish for crypto specifically. And you've got this structural change with institutions now. There will be some level of systemic risk where you might have specific accredited investors that have exposure to the stock market that need to unwind their crypto positions to then cover whatever exposure there is to the likes of this carry trade. And maybe Jump Crypto had some exposure. It's hard to tell. I don't have their financials in front of me, and I don't know if they're public. So,
okay. So, I mean, excellent summary, thoughts, analysis. I appreciate that for the extra details that you have. You mentioned it's kind of hard to know where this goes, which I also agree with and subscribe to. But we said we would come back to Arthur's article just for some key headlines. And this is what he shared of how he's trying to read the situation. So as always, we said at the top of the show, we don't know about this stuff for certain. Sometimes we're learning about stuff just in the morning of the show. Sometimes we're learning it live. This is kind of, I have read this part already because I've identified this as the bit that you might find interesting or helpful. But this is what he says on how to try to read the situation and what happens next. He said, this is the strengthening of the yen. The unwinding of the trade causes coordinated global selling of all financial assets as yen debt, which gets more expensive by the tick. It must be repaid. That's what Sam was talking about. Which force is stronger, however, really depends on the pace of the carry trade unwind. This we cannot know before. The only observable effect is how Bitcoin correlates with the dollar and yen. If Bitcoin trades in a convex fashion, meaning Bitcoin rises in both cases when the dollar-yen pair strengthens or weakens aggressively, then I know that the market expects a bailout if the yen gets too strong and the liquidity provided by the US Treasury is sufficient. This is convex Bitcoin. If Bitcoin falls as the yen strengthens and rises as the yen weakens, then Bitcoin will trade in lockstep with TradFi markets. This is correlated Bitcoin. If the setup is convex Bitcoin, I will aggressively add positions as we have reached the local bottom. If the setup is correlated Bitcoin, then I'll sit on the sidelines and wait for the eventual market capitulation. The mega assumption, it's good that he's pointing this out, is that the Bank of Japan will not reverse course, cut deposit rates back to 0% and resume unlimited bond purchases. If the Bank of Japan sticks by the plan it laid out at its last meeting, the carry trade unwind will continue. But he's obviously saying that that's as prescriptive as he can be. There's no kind of more detailed analysis that he's able to provide or any more certainty that he's able to provide. This is all risky stuff. And then he goes on to say, for a little bit of an inspiration to everyone out there, these trading days and months will define your returns for this bull cycle. Brad, you were distinctly nonchalant yesterday, pretending, 2 days ago, pretending that nothing was happening. Do you think this moment is about to define your returns for the bull cycle?
Fair position. Things are absolutely happening. I just think things are happening outside of my control, and because I think, because I, again, with this point, it's like, yes, this might define like the magnitude of up or down, but or I'm just gonna say up, magnitude of up, but ultimately it's out of my control, and it's just on my plate to determine when to get off the roller coaster, right? So like, yes, it has implications. I can't check any of it, so yes, I'm very, it's very real, like, right, we're talking macro, like the literal currency of a top nation coming into question here, and a lot of unwinding because of that. So yes, implications too, but this stuff is still going to go up and to the right. Is it going to go up as much to the right as before, or without this thing? I, who are we to say? Right? We don't have the education, and we're not the experts in these things. So it's good to observe. It's good to drink it in. Try to form your own opinions from a multitude of sources. But like, yeah, to predict like, oh, this means Bitcoin 125 versus Bitcoin 110 versus Bitcoin 210. Like, I'd rather just put my brain cycles into things that I actually have
For sure.
strong understanding of, and ride that wave and make a decision when that time comes.
For sure. I agree with that. We're just trying to bring together the key sources that we think might be helpful to help us form our thinking for the people who are interested in that article. Once again, it's called Spirited Away by Arthur Hayes. It's a very long article. I just picked out part of the conclusion. I'd recommend going and reading it in full yourself.
And this
Brett.
is part of that too, right? Like, Monday you brought forward like the technical breakdown of what the carry trade even was, right? From someone who's familiar with that. That's great. And now you have Arthur Hayes, which is commenting on the macro impacts of that stuff. So it's good to like mesh those things in your head along with other commentary, right? Kind of drink it all in. Make sure you understand the stuff because that's useful. But yeah, it can only take that so far, or I can only take that so far.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, glad we're able to bring that, as we said, very complex issue going on in the world right now, but we will not shy away from it. We'll do the best we can with it to get you the right information. Let's get into the next headline. I want to talk about ETH for a second, and maybe ETH against other things. We said at the top of the show, the headline was that Jump has been turbo selling its ETH. One source yesterday said Jump Trading cashed out another $116 million worth of ETH. Since Jump started selling ETH on July the 24th, they've withdrawn $611 million from Binance and deposited $550 million into Coinbase. So a hell of a lot leaving the ecosystem now. They seem to be exiting their ETH position. Just another update on ETH, because I want to ask you both, maybe from both of these perspectives. People have been checking in on the ETH ETF, which we kind of haven't really checked in on because of all the other stuff that's been happening. But Nate Garachi had this to say after Crypto Black Monday, where the ETF took in nearly $50 million. It vacuums up approximately $110 million today. So that must have been yesterday, actually. Yeah. That 160 million alone would put it in the top 10% of all ETFs this year. So basically the trading or the inflows from Monday and Tuesday into the ETH ETF would put it into the top 10% of all ETFs for the year. That's perspective that we are familiar with on this show because we keep talking about how the inflows are kind of unprecedented versus normal ETF launches. But it's still kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. The ETF's now nearing $900 million worth of inflows in 2 weeks.
The calculus everyone has to do is, do we think retail is going to outpace this kind of inflow? I mean, we can't say this is going to be static for the duration of its lifetime, but like that's the calculus, right? Because we're all dogging on ETH. We have been dogging on ETH for the broken narrative, the lack of on-chain usage, all this shit, right? But now it's like, okay, so those are things that are going to engage the on-chain people of the world, right? The TG liquidated his 50 ETH and went sent it over to Solana. Okay, whatever. Does that outweigh what this will be on a long enough time horizon? That is the calculus everyone needs to start doing whenever they start going, well, ETH is doing this, well, whatever. Because like, yeah, like on-chain, like narrative may suck right now, but it's one of two assets that have this kind of capital inflow that are allowed to it. Like,
yeah, I think that is definitely the correct question. So maybe we'll go straight to Sam on it in a kind of related question, which is, is it this jump selling that is the thing which is going to be really suppressing ETH at the moment? I know ETH has kind of been suppressed for some period of time. People are obviously moving towards Sol because they're seeing it as this cycle's leader. Maybe this cycle's ETH, frankly, compared with ETH's outperformance last cycle. What's your stance on this at the moment? Maybe taking into account the information that's come out about jump.
Well, I actually tend to agree with Brad on the fact that I guess ETH is slightly different to Bitcoin in the sense that Bitcoin has a hard cap on supply. And if you look at the ultrasound money over the past 30 days, it's been inflationary. So you've got another 56,000 ETH, which is 138 million in circulation in the last 30 days alone. So that's another dynamic that you've got to start considering as well. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I've looked at my gas price thing, it's been a pretty low way, like
Pretty
1,
affordable
2,
all the
3.
time now, isn't it?
Yeah, and like you've got a lot of the activity that's moved to these layer twos that they just do settlement on there, and we've talked about value capture at the layer 2 level, and maybe like is ETH actually becoming that ultrasound money? Because by the looks of it, it's becoming inflationary. So I don't know, like it's a different dynamic to Bitcoin, and that's something that I'm looking at on longer term time horizons. I don't think like a crypto trading firm selling ETH is going to be a significant thing. The two big things for me are institutional demand from the through the ETFs, and I think the Morgan Stanley stuff would be super interesting to see how that plays out over the short term to medium term, but also how much ETH is being burned on chain, which seems to be relatively low compared to where it has been historically. So I think that's ever since the EIP 4488 upgrade. So yeah, that's just another kind of angle to consider when you're considering ETH versus Bitcoin specifically.
That's a great point. Looking at the supply chain, Brett, I'm going to come to you in just a second. Just for people pointing this out, I've got the website up on screen. If people are watching in, if you ever want to go and check this yourself, it's ultrasound.money. Yeah, and it has this little section where it tells you in the last 7 days the supply chain in ETH. In the last 7 days, 18,000 ETH has been issued and 8,300 has been burned, netting out in an increase in 9,600 ETH in supply in the last 7 days. So very, very interesting point, Sam. I'm glad you brought that up. Brad, I know you'll have a thought on this because Sam compared ETH with Bitcoin in that respect, where clearly there's a difference. But Solana is not deflationary either. Like Solana has inflation too. So do you have a thought on that?
I actually did the math on this, and we're expected to be Ethereum supply all-time high around Christmas. That's kind of funny. So that'll like because it's been basically down since switching over to proof of our proof of stake. It was down only after that, but since doing 4844, it's been an upward trajectory. The thing that Sammy called out, it made it super cheap for L2s to burn, or to post down to the L1, create a bunch of new block space. So I'm skeptical that Ethereum will ever, or at least in any medium time horizon, short time horizon for sure, return to the burn to be deflationary. I just don't think it will for a couple of reasons. One, because they've already started the campaign of moving users to L2s. So in that migration, fees actually ticked up not only with L2s, but on like Solana. So in that juncture where people started moving, they went not only to L2s, they went to Solana, they went to other chains because they're just picking up their bags and moving. Okay, cool. And then now with 444, everything's super cheap on the L2 level. So like I'm starting to do the math of like how many dominant, not just L2s, dominant L2s it will take to come back to a deflationary offset like it was pre-Denkun, and it is not a small amount, right? So like you're talking, and that's dominant. That's a base level L2. That's not a fucking Apex or Maverick or Scale or whatever the fuck these other L2s get spun up are doing. Like they're not burning anything, and they're not going to because of how cheap this stuff is. So, anyways, I'm skeptical of how long it'll take for it to be deflationary. But I also don't think that it necessarily needs to be deflationary. I'm starting to open up to this abundance mindset. If you want it to be money, right? You want it to have high velocity. You want it to have access in all these L2s. Like that is a good thing. And then third thing is just like institutions probably do, like, they will care. Obviously, they will care because they like to plug this shit in their spreadsheet and say, oh, it's deflationary, oh, it's all this stuff. That will burn a little bit of on-chain ETH for them because they're not as price sensitive as us if they start building on L1, they start doing all that stuff. But if they only have access to two assets, one is programmable, one isn't, like, they literally will choose ETH because it's the default programmable one, right? They don't have the option of Solana. Heard Matt Walsh, who's the creator of Bitwise, right, the ETF for Bitcoin ETF. It's like, guys, seriously, this thing, you need a futures market. It's like, I'm in the industry. It's going to take several years for Solana or and this second ETF, whatever the ETF is. And he even said that the SEC does not have an appetite right now. They gave a lot to get Ethereum through, and they do not have the appetite for any kind of ETF after that. So, like, this is the plate that we have for several years of inflows, and like, if the market has to choose one to be the QQQ of crypto, and we think things are going right, it's going to be ETH. And is that going to offset, regardless of the on-chain metrics, regardless of the roadmap, which is too complex to understand anyways? Like, does it offset the thread guys of the world rotating to Solana?
Good question. Appreciate that additional insight. One takeaway I would take from what you said as well, more on a more practical side, before we hit the conversation on memes in a second, is a lot of this information. You mentioned one of the interviews maybe you listened to with the CEO of Bitwise. It's just out there. Like, these people are talking quite freely about some pretty important information, and it doesn't always get to people on Twitter, or, well, certainly not mainstream media necessarily. It doesn't always get to Twitter, but like, there are great podcasts around where you can tune into this stuff. We're going to be trying to do some more content like that too. So just keep your ears open. I'm sure you will hear a lot of important stuff like that. Look, we want to hit the Web3 roundup now to get you up to with everything else that's been happening in the space in the last 24 hours. And then we have to take the conversation to memes because they have been absolutely popping off in the last 24 hours. So the Web3 roundup from the snapshot, which is pinned up top. Number one, Pump Fund announces endless chat functionality to build community and live chat during streams, trying to take the Pump Fund experience and make it a little bit more social. Number two, Metaplanet announces raise of 10 billion yen to buy more Bitcoin. Hearing more and more corporates trying to do that. Duper announces $8.7 million raise to build Poker meets Catan game. That's pretty significant. The Starknet Foundation CEO steps down. I think that token has not done particularly well, so there's a bit of furore about that. In some other news around the space on the NFT side, NFT lending platform Gondi hits $25 million in active loans. 56% of them are in ETH and 44% of them are in USD. Ronin was hacked for $10 million, but the RON token surged 10% after the ETH was returned by a white hat hacker. That was pretty fortunate because that would have been the second time Ronin. Well, it is the second time Ronin's got hacked, but at least they got it back quickly this time. And finally, as we mentioned before, DeGods announced they're moving their main chat to Telegram, creating a DeGods HQ. Their NFTs were up quite significantly in the last 24 hours. We have just 6 minutes left for today. We have to go to the memes. I'm going to bring up the sheet, the kind of top gains and losers in crypto from the last 24 hours on this chart. I'm showing it on screen for people who are watching it. Remember, we're live on X, live on video too. And it's just full of memes, guys. Everything has bounced like 30-40% in a day, which is actually pretty crazy if you think about it.
Did you see the spreadsheet that had like the different sectors that was kind of going around for the tweet yesterday, where it was since the crash, and it had the spreadsheet, different categories, DeFi, DePIN, whatever, and everything. Basically everything was red except Solana's green, Bitcoin's green, all memes were green, a bunch of memes were green, and then DePIN was down, DeFi was down, L2s were down, Alt L1s was down, like everything was a shade of red, and that was since the bounce. And then he's like, year to date looks fucked, because then you look at the year to date, it's basically the same, where it's like the memes are up, everything else is still down, and then like the majors. So it's memes, it's the barbell strategy playing out. It's just like, yeah, man, this is a toxic cycle.
That's crazy. I mean, I do think it was very interesting having the conversation with Rahim yesterday, where he was talking about his strategy, which was, obviously there's one legitimate strategy, which is try and find these things early, be on Photon, be on Pump.fun and try and catch one early and hold it for the moonshot. Or alternatively, if he seemed to feel, and this was kind of my analysis after not playing the game for very long, but the sense that I get, which is, look, when things just go crazy down, just buy some, then they'll be up like 30, 40, 50, 60% in a few days, almost like clockwork at the moment. And that has been working out very well for him. So it's very interesting to hear that perspective. The only point that I made, not to necessarily dispute that, because I'm kind of agreeing with him, but I'll just share it, the chart again on the screen for the people who are watching in, for the point that I was making yesterday. And again, I'm not a chartist at all, but Sam, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I've got the whiff chart up on screen. You have the initial run up to like over $4. It dips, it then comes back again to just around $4. It appeared to me that every dip was a bit deeper and every pump higher was a bit less, over and over and over again. And it just reminded me, I think I was speaking about this off screen yesterday with Rahim after the show. It reminded me of Moonbirds. Like when I was in Moonbirds, I remember I didn't mint one. I had to buy one off secondary for like 8 ETH. And I watched it go to like 30 something ETH within a few days. And then what happened over time? This is what happened over time. And I'm ready for the people to tell me that memes are different and that they're $1 billion industry. Over time, they would dip down and then people would buy them up saying, this is now undervalued, because they know what price that they once were. They would then go up, but they would never get to the previous price again. That 30 something ETH was, long in the distance. It would never get there again. Then they would dip again. And then people would say, well, it's not at where it's supposed to be. These are undervalued. We will buy them again. So every dip got deeper. Every high got lower. And that to me is what I see in this chart for WIF.
In male astrology, we call that lower lows and higher highs. Like that's if it's constantly making lower lows and lower highs, bad news bears. Different structure.
There you go. So Sam, maybe my question to you is this: we've got the astrology perspective. Does my reading of this, does my skepticism of this go out the window? Because the thing is, if Solana goes 3-4x, then I guess the thinking is these do break out more, right? Because they're kind of Solana beta. Like, is that how you're thinking about it? Just curious to hear your thoughts. Remember, we don't know this stuff for sure. Just trying to figure this stuff out.
Well, I think there has to be new liquidity coming in for it to do that. And I think, or at least the sentiment has to be that, okay, well, this is immediately going to rocket. Therefore, let me pile into the majors. Once the majors hit like new all-time highs, I think there will be some sort of alt correction, because there will be general consensus that, okay, well, what's the next beta play? And I think a lot of these meme coins like WIF and stuff on Sol will probably run pretty hard. I do agree with you that downwards trajectory that we saw on that chart, it reminds me of the roller coaster that I think Cirrus posted a few days ago. And we're kind of seeing that. And I think when you have more tokens coming out, people's attention and capital is spread more thinly, and therefore you're not going to have those consolidated pumps into those main tokens like they were back in late last year or mid 2023 or whenever it was. So I think that until you have new capital coming in, maybe I'm over rationalizing it, maybe I'm mid curving it, but I just think you need new capital to come in, or at least the notion that there will be all-time highs relatively soon, because like we touched on, like front running on the other stuff that we were talking about earlier, I think it's a similar situation here. It's like psychology of markets. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to have the capital in that moment, but people are willing to deploy that sideline capital, then it will pump harder. So I think there has to be some sort of news on the horizon for people to then think, okay, well, the bull run is literally around the corner. I need to deploy first. So I think that needs to happen first before we see those bigger pumps. And I agree with you that it's just kind of that slow downward trajectory. And yes, I agree with Rahim that there will be those small pumps that people will make profit off. But ultimately, if you're looking to hold these medium to long term, I don't think it's that bullish until you see that new news coming through.
Yeah, the thing I'm starting to wonder is just, if Sol goes up, these go up more. I mean, maybe it's just more simple than we're trying to give it credit for. Like, if Sol goes up, these go up more, which means that if Sol goes up much more, then these go up much more, and if Sol goes down, these go down harder. I don't know.
And I think also like crypto is so diverse now. There's so many different coins, tokens, ecosystems, market segments. I think if you just pick one and you dominate that particular segment, I think you're going to outperform a lot of people. So I think that, like, for me, I know there's a lot more people that are in the trenches deeper than I am. So therefore, like the Solana meme coin stuff, I know I'm not going to have an edge.
Yeah.
So I'm dedicating a lot of my attention elsewhere. And I think similar to you, yes, I'll probably deploy Raheem's strategy occasionally, but I'm not going to go for those low caps because I just don't have the attention to do that.
Yeah, look, I think that's a thoughtful strategy. Interesting conversation again, following on from our one yesterday with Rahim, which was very insightful on kind of meme coin strategies, potential different routes to take advantage of what is clearly the liquidity bubble on memes. Like, that's where attention is, that's where the capital is flowing. There are different ways to slice it. So we will continue to come back to this conversation because we think it's important. And we'll keep checking in with how we are doing on it. That is the end of our show for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to my legendary co-hosts, Sammy and Bread. Thank you to you guys for joining us. As always, we do this every single day, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. BST. Every day of the week, we'll be back, same time, same place tomorrow. Have a good day, and we will see you on the other side. Bye-bye.